Rain fills the night until the trees sound like surf. If you stand on my porch and close your eyes, you can hear the forest breathing, slow and careful, like it does not want to wake whatever listens back. I came to Rainfall Point with a camera bag, 2 boxes of field notebooks, and a promise to finish what I started. The cabin sits on a shoulder of earth above a spill of cedars. A shuttered ranger station rests half a mile to the west. The map shows a creek and a weather mast. No one else stays long out here in mid-autumn. The sky sends down water in cold sheets. The window glass remembers every storm. I keep a small routine. I boil coffee on the propane stove, walk the perimeter with my mug, check the roof for limbs, and stack kindling by the wood box. After lunch, I shoot whatever the rain gives me. Ferns laced with droplets, a fox print filled to the brim, a gloved handprint on my own door that turns out to be mine from yesterday. I write notes when the light goes flat, then read by the stove until the room stops shivering. I do not play music. I like to hear what is true. By late evening, the creek swells and starts to talk over itself. Thunder does not visit. Only a steady drum on the tin roof and a fine hiss on the needles. Inside, the clock on the shelf counts second by second. A gentle sound, almost a companion. Tick, breathe, turn a page. Tick, sip, make another log slide to the orange part of the fire. Simple, safe things. The first oddity is not a sound. It is a small thing in the doorway. The door stands the way I left it, locked, the latch firm. Yet the welcome mat shows a darker stripe that points toward the lake. A wet line where boots might have stood, then turned. I kneel to touch it, and my fingertip comes away clean. No grit, no pine dust, just damp. I tell myself I tracked it in earlier and missed it. That answer fits. I keep it. Around 10, I step onto the porch to measure the rain. Cold air lifts the smell of cedar, wet iron, and wood smoke. The lake lies past the dark trees, a suggestion more than a shape. Wind runs a hand through everything. The radio antenna taps the eave in a tired rhythm. Nothing moves on the trail that cuts between Salal and Swordfern. Still, I let my eyes linger there a breath longer than needed. A habit. The kind that starts when a life has gone quiet enough to hear what the body knows. In the cabin, I set the camera on the table and clean the lens with a square of cloth. The clock says 10:41. I light a second lamp, softer, because harsh light makes the room feel staged. I am not staging anything. I am living. The stove gives a low pop as sap gives up its last bit of steam. I read a chapter on coastal birds and fold the corner for later. I tell myself I will sleep early. I do not. A little before midnight, the wind turns. I hear rain slanting from a new direction. A far branch gives one slow scrape against bark. Then the quiet comes, not the total kind, but a hollowing of the usual noise. It is like a crowd in a room stepping back at once and leaving a space around you. I look up without knowing why. The clock ticks. The radio sits dead on the shelf, its power knob off, its metal face smudged by years of hands. I make tea. The kettle ticks as it warms, and the stove adds its faint whir. I say out loud that the creek is high and the trail will flood by morning. I often speak into the room. It keeps the edges round. When the kettle starts to sing, I pour. Steam fogs my glasses. I set the cup on the table and hold it with both hands until the heat bites soft. The first sound arrives after midnight. Not thunder, not the usual wildlife that moves like a thought through underbrush. It is a knuckle on wood, 3 measured touches, as if someone practices the idea of a knock before doing it for real. I sit up. The cup clicks against the saucer. I meet my own eyes in the window, a pale oval floating in the lamplight. The sound does not come again. You would think I opened the door. I did not. Out here, nights teach patience. I listen instead. The stove, the breath of the room, the clock. I count my own inhale, my own exhale. When I feel foolish, the feeling passes. I decide that a loose branch tapped the siding. I write the thought in my notebook so it has somewhere to live besides my head. Branch, not knuckle. Wind, not intent. The clock hands slide past 1. The tea goes cool. I page through old prints to pick what might fit the book. Ferns, a raven lifting out of a snag, a lichened shelf as big as my wrist. The room settles again. The friendly sort of silence returns. I stand, stretch, and reach for the lamp to dim it. That is when the radio curls into life without my hand on it. No music, no voice, only a thin thread of static that brightens for the length of a breath and fades. The power knob still points to off. I step closer to see if the rain threw a reflection or the switch slipped. The faceplate blinks, a tiny glow, then dark. A sound rises under the static, a low tide noise. Then nothing. I look at the clock. 2:13. I would like to tell you I laughed. I did not. A feeling that did not belong to fear braided through me. Not terror, not danger. It felt like recognition. The way you catch a scent and know it before a name comes. I reached for the radio knob. It was cool. The shelf was cool. The room watched and waited with me, or that is how it felt. I turned the knob to on. The radio stayed quiet, except for a soft bed of far weather. The Ranger channel does not chatter at this hour. I know because I have tried before when storms leaned on the roof, and the creek spoke louder than it should. I kept it on anyway. Sometimes a sound is smoother than silence. At 2:14, the radio gave one click and died. The clock ticked on like it never noticed. I said goodnight to no one and to the rain, then put a fresh log on the fire and settled on the cot. The mattress carried the faint scent of pine and old canvas. The window showed a thin stripe of black trees and a smudge that was the lake. I would sleep, I thought. I almost did. It came again, those 3 measured touches. Not on the wall this time. On the porch boards close to the door, not hard, not soft, simply certain. I lay still. The sound did not repeat. The stove breathed. The radio face was a blind square on the shelf. I closed my eyes and let the rain take me down to the edge of sleep. I told myself it was the roof, the antenna, the branch. I told myself many things. Morning gives answers that feel clean, or I used to believe that. I woke to a pale stripe of light and the smell of damp ash. The rain had not quit. It had only learned to fall more quietly. I put on boots and a jacket and stepped out with my coffee to check the steps for branches. The world looked rinsed and new. The mat held a darker shape again, a long oval that suggested a boot sole and a pivot. The top step held a small pool. In the center, a circle free of ripples, as if a finger had touched it, and the trail toward the lake carried down flow. Mud sucked at my boots. I walked to the edge of the clearing and looked back at the porch. From the trees, the cabin sat like a bright knot in a dark weave. A place, a point. If someone stood here last night and listened, the porch light would have shown them almost nothing. My windows would have thrown small squares into the wet. I felt the oddest thing then. Relief. If anyone had watched, they saw only the idea of me, not me. I went back inside and toweled the camera dry, as if it had been out in the rain with me. I wiped the radio and set it square on the shelf. I wound the clock with the little brass key. Noon came and went. I took one picture all day, a close look at rain threading off a rail. The rest of the hours folded themselves into weather. When dusk returned, I lit the lamps and set the clock where I could see the hands from the cot. I told myself I would mark the next odd sound with simple facts: time, place, quality. I would keep my voice steady if the radio woke again. I would open the door if the knock came a third time. That is what I told myself while the stove breathed. and the rain stitched the roof into one soft fabric. I believed it. At 2:12, the radio light glowed on its own, a small coin of pale green on the dial, and the clock's second hand stopped where it stood. The night remembers what the rain forgets. When you live far from people, you start to notice how the weather keeps secrets for you, and how it whispers them back when the dark feels too quiet. The rain started again before sunrise, soft as breath against glass. I'd slept, but not deeply, the kind of half-dream where sound and memory twist together. When I opened my eyes, the clock still said 2:12. It hadn't moved, not even the second hand. I sat up slowly. The cabin was dim, a washed-out blue from the overcast morning. The radio sat in its corner, silent now, but the faint green glow on its dial was still there. I leaned close. It wasn't the usual signal light. It pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. I unplugged it from the wall. The light stayed on. It should have been impossible. The generator hadn't even been started yet. I kept watching until the light finally dimmed on its own, a slow fade into nothing. The clock, after a full minute, clicked once and began ticking again, like nothing had happened. I wound it tighter, just to feel the weight of something normal under my hands. Outside, fog draped the trees like thin smoke. The lake was invisible. Even sound seemed smaller. That's when I saw it. The footprints. They began at the base of the porch steps and curved halfway around the cabin. Heavy prints, one after another, pressed into the mud. The shape of a boot heel, narrow at the toe, deep enough to hold puddled rainwater. There were about 12 before they vanished toward the trail. None came toward the cabin, only away. I should have followed them then. I didn't. I poured another cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the trail vanish into mist. It felt like the forest itself was trying to erase what had happened. By afternoon, the rain thickened again. I spent hours sorting photos, the small ones I'd taken the previous week. Mostly birds and textures, bark, lichen, a deer trail. When I reached the last roll, my breath snagged. One frame wasn't like the others. It showed the cabin from outside, from the clearing. Taken at night. My porch light glowed faintly, and through the window a silhouette, me, sitting by the stove. But I hadn't taken it. The camera had been with me inside. The date stamp said last night, 2:14 a.m. For a long while, I told myself it was an old exposure, something misfiled, a camera glitch. I almost believed that until I noticed the faint reflection on the window. A shape, not mine. A head, just outside the frame, as if someone had stood a few feet from the glass while the shutter clicked. That was the moment the cabin stopped feeling like a place I lived in and started feeling like a place I was being kept. I tried the radio again. Nothing but static. I turned the knob past every frequency until it squealed, then dropped to a low hum. At 2:13, it came alive. Not with words, but with something close. The rhythm of breathing, faint and mechanical. Then a voice, distant, like it was trapped underwater. It said my name, only once. But hearing your name come from a machine you didn't touch, that sound doesn't leave you. I froze. Every instinct said to turn it off. I couldn't move. The breath on the other end caught once, sharp, like a sigh. Then silence again. When I finally reached for the knob, the light on the dial flicked to green. The clock stopped again. Outside, the rain changed pitch, lighter, thinner, almost like someone dragging fingertips down the glass. 3 slow taps followed, not random, not wind. 3, deliberate. I stood there listening, waiting for another. It never came. When I opened the door, the forest looked normal. Just rain and fog and my breath curling into the air. But on the porch, by the top step, something new waited. A small wooden shape about the size of my palm. A carving, roughly whittled from driftwood. A human figure, arms at its sides, head slightly tilted. Its eyes were two tiny holes drilled straight through. Water pooled inside them. I set it on the table by the radio. I don't know why. Maybe because part of me wanted proof this was all real. The rest of the night passed quietly, except for one strange detail. Every time I looked at the figure, it seemed a little different. The head turned a few degrees. The arms were no longer flat at its sides, but bent slightly, palms open. I didn't touch it. I swear I didn't. At 2:13, the clock stopped again. This time I didn't check the radio. I just sat there, staring at the figure, and realized it was now facing me directly. The rain pressed harder on the roof. I thought of the footprints, the missing photo, the voice. But above all of it, one thought settled deep in me like fog in a valley. Maybe it wasn't a visitor last night. Maybe it was a return. I turned out the lamp, set the carving outside on the porch, and tried to sleep. It wasn't until I woke near dawn that I saw it again, back on the table, wet with fresh rainwater. And this time, its hands were raised. When the clock struck 2:13 again the next night, the radio didn't just. Sometimes the forest remembers more than it should. Sometimes it gives things back that you never meant to leave behind. If something you set outside came back on its own, wet, silent, and different, would you touch it or leave it where it sits? Tell me in the comments. Morning came without light, only fog, thick, silver, and close enough to taste. The clock read 7:06 a.m., but it could have been midnight for how dim the world was. The air smelled of pine and damp ash. My first thought was of the carving. It sat where I'd left it last night, on the table beside the radio, but it had changed again. The arms were bent higher now, not in surrender, not in prayer, but in a gesture that looked almost like reaching. One hand open, one closed. I tried to laugh at myself. Maybe the wood had swollen from the rain, or I hadn't noticed its pose before. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling it was, listening. I stepped outside. The rain had slowed to a mist, but the forest was drenched. Every branch bent under the weight of it. My boots sank into mud with a thick sucking sound. And there they were again, the footprints. Last time, they'd led away from the porch, curving toward the trees. Now there were two sets. One set, smaller, lighter, led to the porch. The other, deeper ones, led away. Each print was sharp, recent. Water hadn't yet filled them. I followed the smaller trail for maybe 20 feet before it vanished into the ferns. The mud beyond looked smooth, untouched, as if the forest itself decided not to let me see where they went. When I turned back, something in the distance shifted. A shape between the trees, low to the ground. I raised my camera out of reflex and clicked the shutter. The flash cut through the fog like a breath of light, then faded. Nothing. Only the echo of the click rolling through the trees. But when I lowered the camera, I noticed something else. The fog near the cabin wasn't moving naturally. It swirled like a slow exhale from something just beyond sight. I went back inside, wiped the mud off my boots, and checked the photo. It showed the tree line, gray, soft, ordinary, but there was a faint outline in the lower corner. A shape, a crouched figure, blurred, as if it had been waiting just behind a tree. I stared at it until my pulse began to slow. Then I closed the camera and set it down. I wasn't sure if I wanted to know more. The radio clicked. No sound at first, just that faint hiss, like the space between words. Then, a voice you shouldn't have followed. I froze. The voice was soft, genderless, almost calm. It wasn't the same tone as before. This wasn't a recording. "Who is this?" I asked, leaning closer. My own reflection hovered in the dull metal face of the radio. "Can you hear me?" The hiss shifted, crackled. Then something that almost sounded like breathing. Not quite human, not quite static. I reached for the knob, but before I could touch it, the voice returned, clearer, closer, like it was speaking directly through the cabin walls. "You left the door open." I looked over my shoulder. The latch was still set, but the back door, the one that led toward the old shed, was swinging slowly, open just an inch. Every hair on my arms lifted. The door hadn't been unlatched in days. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward it, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who's out there?" No reply. Only the creak of the hinge, rhythmic like a pendulum. The air beyond the door smelled colder, sharper, like stone after lightning. I pushed it shut, hard. The sound echoed through the cabin. Then I bolted it twice. The radio snapped off. For the next few hours I kept myself busy, gathering wood, boiling water, doing anything to make noise. But every time I passed the table, I caught myself glancing at that carving. By noon, the sun almost broke through. I decided to take the boat down to the lake edge, just to move, to remind myself the world still made sense. The path was slick with moss. I carried my camera in one hand, the oar in the other. When I reached the dock, I noticed something carved into the post near the water line. 3 shallow lines, side by side, newly scratched. The same pattern that had been carved into the back of the wooden figure. I crouched to look closer and saw something else, a reflection on the lake's surface that shouldn't have been there. My cabin, small and gray in the distance, and beside it, a second shape standing in the doorway. It didn't move, didn't wave, just watched. I looked up toward the cabin and saw nothing. The door was closed. When I turned back to the water, the reflection was gone. I rowed back fast, my heart hammering so hard it felt like another sound layered over the oars. The trees leaned over me, dripping, whispering their slow approval. By the time I reached the porch, rain had started again. Inside, the carving was gone. Only a small wet circle remained on the table, shaped exactly like its base. And on the wall near the radio, written in streaks of muddy water, were the same 3 lines, side by side, carved with a fingertip or a stick. That night, I kept every lamp lit. The rain grew heavier, hammering the roof like thousands of small unseen hands. At 2:13, the lights flickered once. The radio whispered, "You took my picture." And from outside, near the porch, I heard footsteps in the mud, slow, uneven, but moving closer. When I looked out the window, I saw only one set of prints in the mud, leading into the forest. But the porch boards creaked under a second set that hadn't been made yet. Rain can erase most things, tracks, names, the shape of your fear, but not a voice once it's been heard, especially when it knows yours. The storm grew heavy enough to hide its own rhythm. Every drop sounded the same, soft at first, then sharper, as if the sky were pouring nails instead of water. I'd left the lamps burning through the night. Their light turned the windows into mirrors, and every time I passed one, I caught my own shape reflected in them. Still, pale, slightly off-center. I told myself the footprints outside would be gone by morning. That's what rain does. It forgives. But when I stepped onto the porch at first light, the world hadn't forgiven anything. The mud still held 2 sets of prints, one small and light, one deeper, heavier, mine. Only one pair led away. The others stopped right at the edge of the porch, turned toward the door, and ended there. No smudges, no sign of retreat, just an arrival that never left. Inside, the radio waited on the shelf, silent and black. I didn't touch it. I didn't even look at it directly. But when the wind shifted, I thought I heard it humming faintly, like a breath through teeth. I made coffee, though I barely drank it. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. The clock had stopped again at 2:13, and now its second hand hung at a crooked angle, caught between ticks. The figure, the small wooden carving, was still missing. I checked every surface, every shelf, even the space beneath the cot. Nothing. I was halfway through searching the kitchen cabinet when I heard it. The voice. Faint at first, rising through the hiss of static that wasn't there a moment ago. "Can you hear me now?" I froze. The sound wasn't coming from the radio. It came from the small crack of the open window above the sink. I turned slowly. The rain had lightened, but the air beyond the glass seemed thick, heavier than fog. I could hear the creek gurgling somewhere far below the hill. The voice came again, softer this time, like someone whispering from the edge of the tree line. "You shouldn't have taken it inside." I slammed the window shut and pressed my palm against the cool glass. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own pulse, echoing back through my hand. Then the radio snapped on. Static burst like tearing fabric. Then a series of short clicks, not words, not even rhythm, just sound. The green dial glowed faintly again, like something breathing under the surface. I stepped closer. The speaker crackled once more, and this time a voice came through, distant and broken. "Left side. Don't look." The message ended in a long, slow hum. I glanced toward the left wall before I could stop myself. The curtain was moving, not from wind. The window was sealed tight. The fabric bulged inward once, as if something pressed gently against it from outside. I couldn't bring myself to move closer. I waited until it stilled, then pulled the rifle from beside the cot. My breath was loud, too loud, so I tried to match it to the rain's rhythm. One inhale for every drop on the roof. One exhale for every second that passed without sound. When I pulled back the curtain, there was nothing. Just the lake beyond the trees and my own reflection in the glass, faint and ghostly. The rest of the day was strange, half memory, half watching. I barely remember eating. I just remember the way the silence thickened inside the cabin until I could feel it pressing on my chest. By evening, fog crept low over the lake. The air smelled metallic, like the inside of a coin jar. I started the fire early, just to have another sound in the room. That's when I found it again. The carving. It was sitting on the windowsill above the cot, facing inward. The wood had dried, but faint beads of water still clung to the edges of its eyes. Its arms were lowered again, but its mouth, which had been just a shallow groove before, now looked slightly open, like it had been whispering. I set it down on the table, facing the radio, and turned the dial again. Nothing. Just a low, steady hum like a heartbeat under static. Then, faintly, a rhythm emerged. 3 slow taps. The same as before. The same number. This time they came through the radio. I tried to record it on my camera's mic, but the sound stopped the moment I hit the button. I spoke into the room before I realized what I was saying. "Who are you?" The radio hissed once, then fell silent. No reply. I reached to turn it off, and froze. Because beneath the speaker grill, inside the metal mesh, something new had appeared. A fingerprint, small, wet, and pressed against the inside of the glass. That night, I didn't try to sleep. At 2:13, the radio came to life on its own. The voice was faint, whispering between breaths of static. "It's not me you hear. It's what listens through me." Then came the tapping again, not from the radio this time, but from somewhere beneath the floorboards. 3 soft, deliberate knocks. I leaned down, hand shaking, ear close to the wooden planks. Nothing after that, just the sound of my heartbeat and the rain outside. Soft, steady, patient. Until the voice returned, low and calm. "There's another cabin, just like yours. Don't look for it." The static cut off. The clock ticked once, then stopped again. And for the first time, I realized something I should have known sooner. The wood of this cabin wasn't new. It was built from another, maybe from the one the voice had just mentioned. When I ran my hand along the wall, my fingers found carvings hidden beneath the paint, 3 lines side by side, and a single word scratched faintly below them. Listen. Part 5. The photograph on the porch. They say every old cabin keeps a photograph of its first owner somewhere inside. Even if you've never seen it, even if it shouldn't exist. If you found a photo of yourself taken from outside your home, but you'd been alone that night, what would you do with it? Keep it or burn it? It was still raining, but the forest had changed its tone. Not a storm now, just that constant, careful drizzle that soaks into wood and thought alike. The kind that erases distance, so you can't tell where one sound ends and another begins. The carvings on the wall, the 3 lines and the word "listen," looked older than the paint around them. Years older. The edges of the letters had darkened with age, like the wood itself had healed around them but refused to let them go. I pressed my palm against the grooves. They were cool, damp, uneven, too deep for a knife, maybe a chisel, maybe something older than tools. The clock was still stuck at 2:13. I didn't bother winding it anymore. When I opened the door to fetch more wood, a soft flutter caught my attention. A small square of paper, half stuck under the welcome mat. It was a photograph, black and white, faded around the edges. The porch. My porch. The angle looked like it had been taken from the tree line 20, maybe 30 feet away. I was in it, sitting in the rocking chair, head turned toward the lake. My right hand lifted slightly, like I was waving at someone. The problem was, I didn't remember waving. I turned the photo over. On the back, smudged with rain, was a single word written in uneven pencil. Listen. I checked the camera bag, then the negatives I'd developed last week. None matched this angle. The camera hadn't left the cabin since the last storm. I stepped off the porch, scanning the forest line. Just rain, branches, and mist. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling someone had been standing there long enough to wait for me to look away. Inside, the radio hummed softly, a faint, low tone that made the glass in the window tremble. I set the photo on the table and approached it. The hum rose and fell, like breathing again. "Who are you?" I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The answer came in fragments, broken through static. "You know, where it was built." I froze. The photograph trembled on the table, caught in a draft I couldn't feel. I stared at it until the humming stopped. When it did, the entire cabin seemed to exhale, boards settling, stove clicking, air shifting. The quiet that followed was the heaviest yet. I turned the radio off and went to the porch again. I needed air. Rain had soaked through the canopy, a silver curtain between the trees. And then I saw it. Another photograph, nailed to the outer wall beside the window. This one was new, color, not black and white. It showed the cabin again, but from a much closer angle. Through the window. I was in that one too. Sitting at the table, staring at the first photo. The timestamp printed at the bottom read 2 hours ago. I stood there for a long time, the rain dripping down my sleeves, trying to make sense of the impossible. The photos weren't old, they were progressive. Someone, or something, was taking them as I lived. When I went back inside, the first photo was gone. In its place sat the wooden carving, its arms lowered now, palms open, resting flat against the table. Its small wooden face was tilted slightly upward, toward me. I reached for it without meaning to. The wood was cold, slick with moisture, but not from rain. The surface was faintly vibrating, like it held a pulse too quiet to hear. The radio came alive again, this time not with words, but with the sound of a shutter click. A camera, then another, then another. Each perfectly spaced, as though someone outside was taking pictures at that very moment. I turned off the lamp and moved to the window. My breath fogged the glass. For a while there was only rain and darkness, then a flash. Just one, far off between the trees. White light, quick as lightning, but too small, too deliberate. The camera sound came again, faint but real. Not from the radio now, but from the porch. I picked up the rifle. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely keep the barrel steady. I opened the door and stepped into the downpour. Who's there? No answer, just rain on leaves, but the rocking chair was moving, slow and gentle, as if someone had just stood up from it. On the seat lay another photo, this one completely black, glossy. When I tilted it toward the light, something faint shimmered beneath the darkness. A reflection. My own eyes staring back. And behind me, in the photograph's blurred background, was a second shape. Too tall to be mine, too close to the window. I brought it inside and set it with the others. I didn't dare look at the camera. At 2:13, right on time, the radio whispered a single sentence. Now you're in focus. The clock began to tick again, but backward, one slow second at a time. And the wooden figure? It was gone again. When I stepped out to the porch the next morning, a final photo waited on the chair. This time it wasn't of the cabin. It was a close-up of my face, taken from inches away. There's a moment in every long night where you realize the house isn't quiet. It's listening. You breathe differently after that. You move slower, softer, as if it might hear you. I didn't touch the photograph. I couldn't. It lay face up on the porch, rain gliding across its surface in silver beads. My own eyes stared back, wide, unsure, the reflection of a man who already knew what he would see next. The lake behind me was still, a slab of dark glass. No ripples, no sound except the drizzle brushing through cedar branches. When I finally brought the photo inside, the smell of wet earth followed me. The cabin air was thick, heavy with last night's fire smoke. The rocking chair stood by the window, exactly where I'd left it. Only now it was turned slightly toward the table, the same way the wooden figure had been. I tried to ignore it. I made coffee, though it tasted of metal. I checked the locks again, all three of them, twice. Then I gathered every photograph, each one damp, warped, humming faintly when I stacked them together. The stack felt warm, alive somehow. I carried them to the stove, opened the iron door, and laid the first one across the coals. The paper curled instantly, darkening at the edges, then disappeared into ash. I added another and another. The radio crackled to life. "Why are you hiding?" My stomach turned. The voice was close, not through the static now, but in the room, soft, like someone speaking just behind my left ear. I spun around. Nothing. The flames in the stove flickered harder, throwing light across the cabin walls. And in that flickering, the rocking chair moved, once forward, once back. Slow, steady. The wood creaked, but it didn't sound like weight. It sounded like breathing. I set the last photo on the coals. The moment it caught, the rocking stopped. The radio hummed once more, a tone so low I could feel it in my chest, then fell silent again. For the first time since coming here, I thought about leaving. But I knew what the road was like after rain, washed out, slick, crawling with fallen branches. I'd never make it down the mountain at night. So I told myself I'd stay just one more night, one more. I cleaned the rifle, oiled the hinge on the back door, and tried to read. Every sound made me look up. The wood snapping in the stove, the kettle's slow sigh, the clock still stuck at 2:13. When darkness came, I turned on the porch light. Its weak yellow halo reached only a few feet into the mist, a fragile circle of safety. And that's when I noticed the rocking chair again. It had turned fully toward the window now, facing out, as if something on the other side had its attention. I stepped closer, careful, the floor soft under my boots. My reflection met me in the glass, tired, pale, framed by lamplight. Then, for half a second, another reflection appeared beside mine. A second figure, still, tall, unmoving. The chair gave one final creak. I blinked, and the second reflection was gone. I moved the chair to the far corner of the room, away from the window, away from sight. It felt childish, maybe, but I needed it out of my periphery. I dragged it across the wood, leaving 2 dark tracks behind. After that, I sat at the table and turned the radio on again. The static soothed me. The white noise was human somehow, a sound made by contact. I almost relaxed, until the chair began to move again. Even across the room, even in shadow, I could see the faint back and forth of its silhouette. The radio stuttered. The static wavered, shaping itself into rhythm, soft, even pulses that matched the sway of the chair. I whispered without thinking, "What do you want?" The static answered in kind, "To remember." Then silence. The flames in the stove dropped low, red coals pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I didn't move for a long while. Around midnight, I turned off the lamps and sat in darkness, listening. Rain whispered against the walls. Wind stroked the roof. And then, a new sound. A photograph sliding under the door. I lit the lantern. The paper rested half-soaked on the floorboards, edges curling. I knelt and lifted it gently. It was of the rocking chair, empty. But behind it, in the window's reflection, something looked back. A face, pale and expressionless. Mine, maybe, or not quite. In the corner of the frame, a small shape sat on the table. The wooden figure. Its arms raised, its mouth open. I dropped the photo, heart slamming. When I turned to look at the table, the figure was gone. But on the chair, right where the headrest met the shadow, 2 small, wet fingerprints shone in the lantern light, not on the wood, inside it, as if something had pressed from within, trying to get out. That night, I didn't sleep at all. At 2:13, the radio stayed silent, but the chair didn't. It rocked, slow, patient, and with each movement, it seemed to inch closer to the window again. When dawn came, I found muddy footprints leading from the chair to the window, and none leading back. When you live long enough with the rain, you start to believe it's a voice. Gentle when you listen, unkind when you ignore it. If the storm finally stopped after days of dread, would you feel relief or fear what the silence might reveal? The rain had been my only companion since the first knock. It filled the air, the walls, even my sleep. But that morning, for the first time in nearly a week, it stopped. No drizzle, no wind, no sound. Only the kind of silence that feels alive. I sat on the porch, coffee untouched, staring at the stillness. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the lake didn't move. Inside, the clock still read 2:13. The chair still faced the window. The rifle leaned against the wall, its barrel cold from the night air. The footprints by the window had dried into dark stains. Too deep to be mine. Too close to the glass. I decided to leave. Not tomorrow. Not after the rain returned. Now. The path down to the main road was 6 miles, maybe 7 with detours. I could make it by midday. I packed the bare essentials: camera, radio, notes, and 1 photograph. The first one, the one I hadn't burned. The picture of me sitting on the porch, head turned toward the trees. I wasn't sure why I kept it. Maybe I wanted proof that something or someone had seen me. When I reached the door, I paused. The chair moved, just once. A slow, final rock forward, then stillness. The air inside the cabin changed, thinner, lighter. I realized the smell of damp wood was gone, replaced by something older. Dust and iron. I stepped outside and closed the door. The latch caught with a soft click that sounded too much like relief. The forest was clearer than I'd ever seen it. Pale sunlight spilled through the canopy, painting the moss in shades of gold. No movement, no birds, no insects, just silence. Halfway down the trail, I stopped. Something was wrong. The trees were repeating. The same broken cedar on my right, the same cluster of stones on my left. I turned around, expecting to see the cabin through the fog, but it wasn't there. Only more forest. I kept walking, faster now. The ground felt soft, spongy underfoot. I called out, once, twice. My own voice came back slower than it should have, like the air had to think about returning it. Then faintly, from behind me, a sound, a single creak, like a chair rocking once in a quiet room. I turned back. Nothing. The air shifted again, colder now and full of static. I pulled the radio from my pack. It was on. I hadn't turned it on. The dial glowed green. "You're almost there," it whispered. "Who are you?" I said. My voice cracked. "You always ask that," it replied. "But it's never me who answers." The static swelled, almost painfully loud. Then a single knock, not through the speaker, behind me. I turned slowly. Through the mist, something took shape. A cabin. Mine. But not mine. The boards were newer, lighter in color. The porch steps unbroken. The window intact. A rocking chair stood by the door, still moving, and in it sat me, or someone who looked exactly like me. Head tilted, eyes half closed, a faint smile. He looked calm, peaceful even. Then he raised his hand and waved, just like in the first photograph. I dropped the radio. The voice inside it kept whispering, growing more distant. "Stay. You've come home." The figure on the porch stood, and behind him, through the open door, I saw movement. Small, slow. The wooden carving sitting on the table, its arms raised again, its mouth wider now, almost forming a word. I stepped back. Every instinct screamed to run. But my boots sank deeper into the mud, soft, sucking, heavy. The figure took one step off the porch, then another. Each footfall landed with a sound that wasn't quite natural, like wood creaking in rhythm with a heart. He stopped just short of the trail. Rain began to fall again. Not loud, not a storm, just enough to blur his face. The radio sputtered one last time. "The rain remembers." Then silence. When I looked again, the figure was gone. So was the cabin. Only the sound of rain, gentle, endless, filled the forest. I walked for hours, maybe longer. The trail eventually ended at the Ranger Road, slick with new mud. My boots left prints that filled slowly with water. When I reached my truck, the door was open. Inside, on the passenger seat, lay the radio, dry, clean, and still glowing faintly green. Beside it, a single photograph, the cabin, taken from the woods. Empty porch, empty chair, except for one detail. In the window's reflection, a figure sat at the table, head tilted, looking out. Not me. Not anymore. The clock inside the photograph showed 2:13, and if you listened close enough, you could almost hear it tick.